Have you ever wondered why the harder you try to fix your life, the worse everything seems to become? You fight harder for a relationship, and it slips away. You work harder for success, yet every door seems to close. You push yourself forward, but somehow life keeps pulling you back. Sit with that for a moment. Really sit with it. Because somewhere inside you, beneath the noise of your daily thoughts, there is a quiet suspicion you have never said out loud. A suspicion that maybe, just maybe, the struggle itself is the problem, not the outcome, not the timing, not the people who left or the opportunities that closed. The struggle, the forcing, the white-knuckled grip you have on a life that keeps slipping through your fingers, no matter how tightly you hold on. What if those obstacles aren't punishments? What if they're protection? What if the exhaustion you feel right now, in this very moment, isn't weakness, but a message written in a language older than words, older than logic, older than the ego that has been running your life like a frightened general defending a city that was never under attack? Psychology suggests something remarkable here. When the ego tries to control everything, the soul slowly withdraws its energy. It doesn't announce this. It doesn't send a formal notice. It simply goes quiet. And in that silence, something extraordinary begins. Life starts speaking in a completely different language. A language of dreams, of coincidences, of sudden fatigue, of doors that won't open no matter how hard you push. A language you were never taught to read, because the world trained you to listen, only to logic, only to effort, only to the loud insistent voice that says do more, try harder, force it. In this video, you will discover the hidden signs that you are resisting your true path. You will understand why everything sometimes has to fall apart before it can come together. And you will learn how guidance, the kind some call divine and others call the deeper self, tends to appear precisely when you finally stop forcing life. Stay until the end, because somewhere in the next 30 minutes there is a single realization waiting for you. And once you see it, you will never look at your setbacks the same way again. Let's begin. There is a particular kind of tiredness that no amount of sleep can fix. You know the one. It is not the tiredness of a long day. It is the tiredness of a long life spent pushing against a current that was never meant to be pushed against. And if you have felt it, you already know that something inside you has been trying to tell you the truth for a very long time. Carl Jung once described the ego as merely the center of consciousness, not the center of the personality. A small flickering candle in a vast dark cathedral mistaking itself for the entire structure. The ego believes it is the architect of your life. It believes that if it simply plans enough, controls enough, grips tightly enough, it can engineer safety out of chaos. This is the ego's deepest illusion. Action equals safety. Movement equals progress. If I am doing something, anything, then surely I am not drowning. But notice something here. Notice it slowly, the way you would notice a shadow moving at the edge of a room. Busyness is rarely about productivity. Busyness, in its most hidden form, is often about avoidance. It is the ego's way of outrunning a feeling it refuses to sit with. As long as there is a next task, a next goal, a next fire to put out, there is no space for the quiet, terrifying question underneath it all. Am I even going the right direction? This is why so many people stay perpetually busy, perpetually exhausted, perpetually one step ahead of collapse. Not because their lives demand it, but because stillness feels like danger. In stillness, the unconscious speaks, and what it often says is not comfortable. Think about the difference between movement and direction. A ship's engine can run at full power, churning the water into white foam, consuming enormous energy, creating the unmistakable feeling of progress, while the ship drifts further and further from where it was ever meant to go. Motion is not the same as meaning. Effort is not the same as alignment. You can work 80 hours a week and still be moving away from your purpose with astonishing efficiency. This is the dangerous illusion of control. It convinces you that the solution to a misaligned life is simply more force, more hustle, more willpower, and so you push. You force the relationship that keeps unraveling. You force the career that keeps rejecting you. You force the version of yourself that the world seems to want. Even as your body, your sleep, your nervous system begin quietly screaming otherwise. And here is where it becomes almost eerily precise, almost mathematical in its consistency. The harder the ego forces a path that was never meant for the soul, the more resistance that path generates. Not as punishment, as redirection. Jung would say the unconscious compensates. Whatever the conscious mind neglects, the unconscious will exaggerate until it can no longer be ignored. Push against your true nature long enough, and life will not simply let you struggle in peace. It will escalate. Because on some level, beneath your awareness, something in you does not want you to succeed at the wrong life. Let that sink in for a moment. Something in you does not want you to succeed at the wrong life. This is the beginning of understanding why your soul stops giving you energy. Because energy, real energy, the kind that fuels sustained effort without destroying you, is not an unlimited resource dispensed equally regardless of direction. It behaves more like water flowing downhill. It moves easily, almost effortlessly, when you are aligned with your natural course. But damn that water, force it uphill, redirect it against its own nature, and watch how quickly exhaustion sets in. Watch how quickly motivation, that thing you keep waiting to magically return, simply refuses to show up. You have felt this, perhaps you are feeling it right now. A goal you once chased with fire in your chest now feels like dragging a stone through wet sand. You tell yourself you are lazy. You tell yourself you have lost discipline. You berate yourself in the mirror, demanding more hustle, more grind, more forcing. But what if the sudden disappearance of motivation is not a character flaw at all? What if it is data? What if your own depleted energy is the most honest feedback system you will ever have access to, and you have spent years overriding it with sheer willpower, calling that override strength? This is the psychological meaning behind exhaustion that sleep cannot touch. It is not always physical. It is existential. It is the unconscious mind withdrawing its investment from a project it no longer believes in. And when the unconscious withdraws, the conscious mind is left holding a life it must now run entirely on force, which is, quite simply, unsustainable. No human being, no matter how disciplined, can indefinitely manufacture energy for a life their deeper self has already voted against. Your inner energy, then, becomes a kind of compass, not a perfect one. Not one that removes all effort or difficulty from life, because meaningful things do require work. But there is a distinct difference between the fatigue of growth and the fatigue of misalignment. Growth fatigue feels like muscle soreness after training. There is strain, but underneath the strain, there is aliveness. Misalignment fatigue feels like something being slowly drained from you, a low hum of dread beneath even your successes. A sense that you are winning a game you never wanted to play. And this is precisely why trying harder so often makes everything worse. Because when you interpret misalignment fatigue as a lack of effort, you respond by adding more force to a system that is already collapsing under force. It is like flooring the accelerator of a car whose wheels are stuck in the mud. The engine screams, the tires spin faster, and the car sinks deeper. But before life ever collapses entirely, before the ground gives way completely, there are warnings, quiet ones, almost imperceptible ones. And this is where we must slow down, because these are the signals most people spend their entire lives learning to ignore. Anxiety that appears for no logical reason. A tightening in the chest right before you walk into a room you have walked into 100 times before. Burnout that descends even during seasons that, on paper, look like success. Emotional numbness, that strange grey fog where you feel neither particularly happy nor particularly sad, just absent from your own life, going through the motions of a story that stopped feeling like yours somewhere along the way. These are not malfunctions. Jung would call them messages from the unconscious, the deeper intelligence within you that never stopped watching, even when your conscious mind was too busy, too distracted, too committed to the plan to notice. The unconscious does not use words at first. It uses sensation, it uses dreams, it uses the sudden inexplicable urge to cry in your car, in a parking lot for no reason you can name. It whispers. And if the whisper is ignored long enough, it does not whisper again, it waits. And then it speaks in the only language left available to it. Collapse. It waits. And then it speaks in the only language left available to it. Collapse. The lost job that felt like devastation at the time. The relationship that ended in a way you never saw coming, though some quiet part of you always knew. The health scare that finally forced you to stop, when nothing else could. Look back now, with distance, with the strange clarity that only hindsight provides, and ask yourself honestly, were these truly random tragedies? Or were they the final, undeniable sentence in a conversation your unconscious had been trying to have with you for years? This is the part of the human psyche that modern life has taught us to fear most. The falling apart. We have been conditioned to see collapse as failure, as the opposite of a life well lived. But sit with this for a moment, slowly, the way you would sit with a fire on a cold night. What if falling apart is not the opposite of your becoming? What if it is the very mechanism of it? There is a reason ancient traditions, mythologies, and even the deepest psychological frameworks all circle back to the same pattern. The old self must die before the new self can emerge. Jung called this process individuation, the lifelong journey toward becoming who you actually are beneath the masks, the roles, the inherited expectations you were never truly given a choice about. And individuation is rarely gentle. It does not knock politely and wait to be invited in. It arrives, more often than not, through crisis. Through the very endings you have spent your entire life trying to prevent. Think about the failures you have survived. Not the small inconveniences, but the real ones. The ones that, in the moment, felt like the end of everything you had built your identity around. Now ask yourself a harder question. Did that failure destroy you? Or did it destroy a version of you that needed to end so something truer could take its place? This is the hidden purpose behind loss that so few people ever allow themselves to see, because seeing it requires something the ego despises above all else. Surrender. The admission that you were not, in fact, the one in control. That the plan you were so desperately protecting was never the whole plan. That the door slamming shut in your face was not cruelty, but redirection wearing the mask of cruelty, because redirection, in the moment, always feels like loss before it ever feels like grace. There is a concept in depth psychology called ego death, and it sounds far more dramatic, far more violent than what it actually is in practice. Ego death simply means the dissolving of an identity that has become too small for the life trying to move through you. It is the version of you built on a career that no longer fits, a relationship that no longer reflects who you have become, a set of beliefs handed to you by people who were themselves terrified and simply passed that terror down as wisdom. That version of you has to die. Not because it was evil or wrong, but because it was temporary. A scaffolding meant to hold you up only until the real structure could be built underneath. And here is the quiet, almost unbearable truth hidden inside every collapse you have ever lived through. It was preparing you. Not punishing you. Preparing you. Every ending stripped something away that you could not have released willingly. Because the ego never releases anything willingly. It has to be pried loose. Sometimes gently, through boredom and quiet dissatisfaction. Sometimes violently, through loss you never saw coming. But either way, the result is the same: space. Empty, aching, unfamiliar space where something false used to stand. And it is in that space, that terrifying, disorienting emptiness, that something else begins to happen. Something you cannot force, no matter how hard you try, because forcing was always the disease, never the cure. You begin to notice things. The name of a book someone mentions in passing turns out to be exactly what you needed to read that week. A stranger says a sentence that feels less like small talk and more like a message meant only for you. You think of someone you have not spoken to in years, and your phone rings moments later, and it is them. You tell yourself it is coincidence, randomness, the brain's tendency to find patterns in noise. And perhaps, if it happened once, you would be right to dismiss it. But it does not happen once. Jung had a word for this, one of the most quietly revolutionary ideas in the history of psychology. Synchronicity. Meaningful coincidence. Events connected not by cause and effect, the language the rational mind insists on, but by significance. By meaning that arrives precisely when it is needed, as though something beyond your conscious planning is arranging the pieces of your life in an order you could never have engineered through force alone. This is not superstition dressed up in academic language. This is the observation of a man who spent his entire life studying the psyche, who noticed that when a person aligns with their deeper self, when they stop forcing and start listening, the world itself seems to respond differently. Opportunities appear that were not there before, or perhaps were always there and simply could not be seen through the fog of forced effort. People enter at precisely the right moment, not because fate is sentimental, but because when you stop gripping so tightly to one outcome, you become capable of perceiving doors you were previously too consumed to notice. Consider the people who have entered your life at moments that, in retrospect, feel almost impossibly precise. The mentor who appeared exactly when you were about to give up. The friend who said the one sentence you needed to hear on the one day you needed to hear it. The stranger whose passing comment redirected the entire trajectory of your career. Were these accidents? Or were they evidence of a guidance system so subtle, so quiet, that it can only be heard once the ego stops shouting long enough to let it speak? This is what it means to learn the invisible language of guidance. It rarely arrives as a booming voice, or a lightning bolt of clarity. It arrives as a feeling, a pull towards something you cannot fully justify with logic. A resistance to something that looks perfect on paper but feels, somewhere beneath your ribs, deeply wrong. It arrives as timing you did not orchestrate, as the right book falling into your hands at the exact moment you needed its message, as the closed door that, months later, reveals itself to have been the very thing that saved you from a life that was never yours to live. And this brings us, finally, to the question that matters more than any other question you will ask yourself this year. How do you know, with any real certainty, that you are finally on the right path? The ego wants proof. It wants certainty, success, external validation, a clear map with guaranteed outcomes. But the soul does not speak in certainty. It speaks in peace, quiet, steady, unshakable peace, even in the midst of uncertainty. This is perhaps the most counterintuitive truth in this entire exploration. The right path is not always the one that feels exciting or impressive. It is the one that feels underneath everything, calm, aligned, home. Success and alignment are not the same thing, and confusing the two is where so many lives quietly go astray. You can achieve everything you set out to achieve and still feel that low, persistent hum of wrongness beneath it all. Or you can walk a path that looks, from the outside, uncertain and unremarkable, and feel, for the first time in years, that you can finally breathe. That stillness, that unfamiliar quiet is not the absence of ambition. It is the presence of truth. Surrender in this sense is not defeat. It was never defeat. Surrender is the moment the ego finally loosens its grip long enough for something wiser to take the wheel. It is the moment you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start ask, what is this trying to show me? And the moment you make that shift, however small, however quiet, life begins to respond in ways that force could never have produced. The greatest turning point in your life will never come from forcing the right door open. It will come from realizing that the wrong doors were never meant for you. Sometimes the deepest kindness you will ever receive is not being given what you asked for. Sometimes it is being refused. Refused the job that would have quietly consumed your soul. Refused the relationship that would have taught you to shrink. Refused the version of success that looked golden from a distance and would have left you hollow up close. Because something in you, something wiser than your fear, something that has been patiently waiting beneath all that forcing and striving, was never willing to let you settle for less than what you were actually created for. So if your life feels like it is falling apart right now, if the ground beneath you feels unfamiliar, if the energy you once had has quietly disappeared, if doors keep closing no matter how hard you push, consider, just for a moment, a different interpretation. Not punishment, not failure. Redirection. Stop forcing. Not because effort is wrong, but because force was never the language your soul speaks in. Listen instead to the exhaustion, to the silence, to the timing that feels too precise to be accidental. Because when you finally stop forcing life finally begins to guide you.